Hello, everyone. It's quiet this morning. Everybody's kind of subdued. I wonder if it's at the weather or it's just the tone on campus. Combination of, I don't know. I'm not complaining about it because one of the more difficult things is when I'm starting class and it's really raucous and you start talking and then I've had a few classes. This class is, by the way, this class is great. I don't want you to think that I'm making any criticisms. I'm not really criticizing any class. It's just kind of an odd little scenario. I'll start talking and somebody will be in the middle of a conversation. And I'm like, well, I can't hear what you're saying, so let me raise my voice above Dr. Barnes. And so the conversations keep going on, and I'm just kind of like trying to convey important information, at least what I think is important, and the conversation just keeps going. I'm gonna have to say, all right, guys, gonna have to quiet down, but yeah, not really a problem today. So yeah, not really a problem ever, but I I don't know where I'm going with this. I just thought it was kind of quiet. That's all my only observation today. Today we are going to get back to NetSuite after a 3-week hiatus. So remember we stopped on NetSuite 4 and we're moving on NetSuite 5. We're going to finish part of the purchasing process. So let's go ahead and review what it is that we talked about NetSuite 4 because we need to remember what it is we did. Now, just for clarification, if you're on the front page of NetSuite, you may notice that they've got a new release down here, and they had a release that was on Las Vegas, like a release celebration. Unfortunately, we missed that. There's nothing in the Truman State budget that we could pay for a trip to Las Vegas to learn about NetSuite, but we do have a new release, and that occurred while we were not using NetSuite. I did walk through NetSuite and tried to check and make sure. It doesn't look like anything has changed. That being said, if you're just working through it and you say, I'm trying to figure out what Dr. Barnes is doing, it doesn't match anything I'm doing, please let me know so we can stop and take care of it. Also, if I pause for a second and something looks a little bit unfamiliar, if I'm hesitant, it's because I'm just trying to get my bearings. Again, I don't think anything significant has changed, but I've said that in the past and they've made just substantial changes. And then, like, if you go back like 3 years ago and watch my class lectures on this, I had one class lecture. I just looked like I was a befuddled old man. And I was, because everything had changed in NetSuite like from the day before. And I was trying to figure out what the heck was going on. But I think I've done my due diligence. So what did we do last time? Remember, we started off last class period and we said we're going to start the purchasing process. So what was our first thing that we did? Well, we created those snarky named textbooks. Remember, I Love AIS textbook, or I Hate AIS, depending on what you want to do, or I Feel Meh about AIS. One of those three probably. So you created a textbook, and that's what we're going to be selling. We're going to be selling a product. And so that's basically where we're at right now, is that we've created our product and we've placed an order. And if you did this correctly, you should have a purchase order up here. Now, I recognize that many people may have revised the process. They may have missed a step and had to go back. So you may have multiple purchase orders here, and that's fine. Again, we're not placing actual purchase orders. So if you want to repeat the process just for practice, that's cool. What we want to be doing is operating on the purchase order that we're going to be working with those. That's going to be our first step, is starting there. Also, just as a refresher, because this is definitely something that I will ask about on the exam, remember we stopped in the middle of our process and I say, hey, let's go check and make sure there's a setting that's unchecked, okay? Does everybody remember we did that? And you may not remember exactly what we did, but you remember that we stopped and I said, we have to make sure this setting is unchecked, which seemed like a waste of time because it was unchecked and it's always unchecked. But what was the purpose of that? Remember, we had to make sure that we had unchecked that items can bill in advance of shipment. And the whole idea behind that is we don't want our vendors sending us invoices before they've shipped goods. Because if you get an unscrupulous vendor, what are they going to do? They're just going to start sending you invoices for things you never purchased. And if you don't have good controls in your organization, they may say, well, we owe the vendor. Let's go ahead and cut the check and just move on. So that was one of our goals there. We're not going to have a similar task to that today, but we will have a similar task to that next week when we talk about the revenue process. We start that up. All right. So everybody at the homepage? Excited and waiting with bated breath. So let's go ahead and move to our purchase order. So let's go ahead and click on this purchase order link right here. So we've placed a purchase order with our vendor. Our vendor is Planning Partners LLC. We placed a purchase order. If they've accepted that purchase order, what is presumably the next step? This is from the purchasing process that we've talked about already. What is presumably the next step after we submit that purchase order? I know we're not testing this in the exam, but it's probably still a good idea to remember the purchasing process just for context. So we say, we'd like for you to send us the goods. What are they going to do? I'll give you hints, the last three words of what I just said. send us the goods. Okay, they're going to send us the goods. They're going to ship the goods to us. So that's ultimately what we're trying to do. So they're shipping the goods to us. What are we going to do with those goods? We are going to receive those goods. So can anybody guess what we're going to be clicking on this particular screen? Probably the receive button. We're going to click on the receive button. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, are there alternate ways to go around this? Yes. We're going to try to simplify this, and we're going to go to basically our source files whenever possible. But there is a list you can go here. You can actually go through transactions, purchases, and receive orders and identify your PO. But for the most part, just going to the purchase order and clicking on receive, that's the best policy. All right, so here we are today, October 15th, 2025. Now, I want to preface what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be doing a lot of pointing and clicking, not a lot of typing, because basically we've set up everything already. We just need to go through the process. So let's go ahead and create this item receipt. Now, we're on this screen right here. Again, our reference is to be generated, which again, a good ERP system should always do that. We want to make sure that the document numbers are auto-generated because we want to be able to follow sequence. So that's good for us to know. Let's check our information, make sure that all the information, the detail is correct. So the receive down here should be checked because this is the item that we're receiving. So I kind of jumped ahead. The date is correct. We scroll down here in the items, we should have receive check because that's what we're receiving. We are going to receive it in our US1 location. That's what we specified in our order. And we ordered 30 textbooks. So everybody on board with that? Okay. So if that's the case, then we're going to go ahead and we're just going to click on the save button. Now, I do want you to note here that there's a couple of items here that we can click on save, or we can go to save and bill. And those are effectively going to be the same process. It's just we'll skip a step. I would prefer that you click on save so you can see the next step. But if you click on save and bill, we're going to go to the exact same place from that. But let's just go ahead and click on save. And then we wait, as always, as NetSuite moves forward, because that's what we use the ERP system tool on the internet for, is that's going to be a little bit of a lag on there. It's not instantaneous. So I have to make up things to say while we're talking. So everybody have a good Wednesday so far? It's a good Wednesday. I don't know if there's such a thing as a good Wednesday, but my personal preference. But on average Wednesday, this is above average, we would argue. All right, so there you go. All right, so confirmation, the transaction is successfully saved. We have received our items. All right, we have received our items. Now, what does that give the implicit permission to our vendor to do? Yeah, send the invoice. Okay, what does an invoice represent? We use that term invoice, but what is it just a fancy term for? It's a bill. Okay, it's a bill that they're sending us. Say, all right, we've done our part. Here's what you owe us. All right. So let's go ahead and communicate to our vendor that we can go ahead and receive that invoice, that they can send us the invoice. And you probably can guess what we're going to be doing, clicking on. We're going to be clicking on this bill item right here. Now, again, remember earlier when I was highlighting save and there was a save and bill function? If you clicked on save and bill, you just basically jumped forward to this step where we click on bill and we're moving to the next step. So we're going to the bill again. This is going to forward us to our invoice. At this point, we're saying that the vendor should have sent an invoice to us, and we're going to acknowledge that invoice. What is the whole purpose of the invoice? The invoice, from the purchasing perspective, is determine what it is we need to pay. And so we're going to go through that process. We're going to go through the recognition of it. And we're going to set the bill. So let's go ahead and get this set up. All right, so let's go ahead and check all the information, make sure it's correct. We've got our date correct. We've got our vendor bill number. It's going to be auto-generated. There's a couple of things we want to note. We want to make sure our base amount is correct. This is the $449.70 because remember, we are purchasing at $29.90 or $29.99. I think that's right. Or $14.99, sorry, $14.99, 30 items. Math. $14.99 times 30 items. And then we want to check a few things that our location's correct. For the account, make sure that we have 2110 payables for AP trade listed. Now that should auto-populate, but we're going to check this information. And it just sounds, again, tedious and redundant, and I'm going to hear me say this a lot. Checking the information is going to be our primary task here, simply to make sure that the information is correct and what we expect it to be. If it's not, we do to make adjustments. The good news is that we don't have too many things to worry about here because everything should be correct. There is one thing I do want to check that's not necessarily obvious. So I want you to scroll down. And you can kind of see, here's the list of the items that we've already ordered. Let's click on billing. Now, does anybody remember what the terms are that we specified in our purchase order? remember, I did have you make a change for this at the end of our purchase order. We said that our purchase order was originally defaulted at net 30, okay? But we changed it to 1%, 10 net 30. So if we pay within 10 days of receiving the items, we get a 10% discount. Now, if you click on the billing tab, it should say terms 1%, 10 net 30. That's the key factor to note. So does everybody have that listed there? If you don't have that listed there, you're going to be paying full price, which that means you owe me $4 or something like that. So I am keeping tabs on this. All right, keeping tabs like a good accountant. But anyway, so $4.70 basically would be the discount. Let's clarify that we've actually received that discount. And again, $4.70 in the grand scheme of things is not big, but making sure that we consistently do this for all transactions is going to be really important. So it should say the amount after discount is $447.20. So remember, our original order was $449. I think it said $470. It's a $450 discount, which makes more sense because it's about a $450. So $4.50 discount. So $449.70 was our original amount order. $445.20 is amount after discount. That's basically what we're trying to verify. All right. So again, just validating information, checking, make sure it's correct. If that's the case, let's go ahead and click on save. So this validates the invoice that we received. Now, what do we need to do when we receive the invoice? Because we basically sent an invoice request to our client, our vendor. The vendor should send the invoice to us saying, here's what you owe, and then we're going to pay at some point. Presumably, we're going to pay within 10 days, right? Because we want to take advantage of that discount. So we need to make a payment. And the good news is we have the resources at our disposal that we're going to pay within like 2 minutes, okay? So we're going to be well within that 10 days. However, you will notice that moving through the links here, that we can't go to the next step. We can't necessarily go to the next step because we're right here. We're back at item receipt. We already created the bill. Where do we go from here? This is where we're going to have to vary. We're going to have to go back a few steps. We're going to have to go back to where we need to go to be able to make payment. So let's go ahead and click on the home button. Go back to our main page. And you'll notice we still have our items here. Here's our original purchase order. Here's our bill, okay? And here's our item receipt. And you notice that these numbers have been set out. I do think it's interesting. Purchase order and item receipt do have kind of proprietary numbers. Bill is just the date of the bill, which that's just kind of lazy to me because there could be multiple bills on that same date, but it is what it is. I guess if you make multiple bills, then there's going to be multiple bills of the same date. Let's go ahead and let's click on this bill right here. Let's click on this bill. Go back to the billing step. So we verified the item receipt. We've said to the bill that we can receive the invoice. What do we need to do now? We need to pay the invoice. So our next step is to make payment. Now, I do want to make a note here. You can go ahead and click on make payment. I'm going to do that too because it's going to take me a second to load thing. I do want to make a note here. Again, just like everything else, we can go through the longhand of working through the transactions. So transactions payable, pay single vendor. So payables, pay single vendor. I'm not going to encourage you to follow that path simply because if you do that, you have to, first of all, identify the vendor, and then we have to specify exactly which invoices we're paying. By working through the links that are already present, it will specify for us the items that we're going to pay, and we'll see why that's an issue. So let's go ahead and specify that our information is correct. Again, our 2110 AP account should be the same one that we just specified. The date should be correct, planning partners. Everybody should have check number 5. Has everybody got a check number listed? Okay, it doesn't necessarily need to be number 5, but there should be at least a check number listed. Please make a note of that check number because we are going to refer back to that when we look to what the payment is. Subsidiary US West, we're going to be operating out of cash account 1020, okay? Now, a real quick note about cash accounts. If we look at the cash accounts here, if we just kind of do the drop down, you will notice there are multiple cash accounts. 2 checking accounts were listed. We're going to stay at 1020. But oftentimes when organizations operate from both purchasing and purchasing and revenues, they operate out of different cash accounts. So the cash accounts that you use for purchasing are not going to be the same cash accounts you use for receiving. And the reason is that you want to make payments out of one account and you want to receive your cash into another account, and they shouldn't overlap. So if you do see payments made out of a single account that shouldn't be making payments, then you can specify, all right, why is a payment being made out of this account? It's much easier to track that way in large organizations. So we're specifying this is going to be our accounts. So we're going to be operating out of this one, and this is going to be specific for this chart of accounts. 1020 cash is our second U.S. checking account. All right, let's go ahead and check down here. Now, this is really important. This is one of the reasons why I had you walk through the make payments button, okay, is that I wanted to make sure that your bill payment specified this bill right here, 11/14. Okay, so this is the one right here. So this is the date that it's due because we said that we received it from today. What's 30 days from today? 11/14. Okay, so this one right here. You will notice we've got an outstanding bill that's a little bit over almost a year old. We're not going to deal with that right now for whatever reason. This is just data that was already in the system, so we're going to ignore that. But we want to specify that we're going to pay this one. So you should have an apply button clicked on this one and not on this one right here. So we're only going to apply one of them. So let's oh, there's one thing really important that I forgot to do. You guys didn't forget it because I didn't tell you, but almost forgot to do it. All right. So over here on the right, what I would like to specify is under memo, there's a box that says to be printed. So go ahead and click on that. Now, what does this do? This is specifying that we want a printed copy of the payment, a printed copy of the check, which is really important to specify because this is going to be your deliverable for this assignment. So if you don't click on to be printed, it's going to be very hard to print the check. So make sure you click on that, and then we're going to identify whatever we just need to do. So we should have everything listed, payees listed, all of our applications. So yeah, all the information should be input other than that. So the only thing you really had to click on was the additional to be printed to specify that's correct. So let's go ahead and click on save. That's an interesting question. I wish I knew. So in all likelihood, basically what that's saying is that there's some sort of series of transactions between the vendor and the customer, between the vendor and us as a customer, and it may be that we buy from them and they buy from us, so there's offsetting balances. But that's my best guess on that, but I honestly don't know. It's an interesting question though. Means that they owe us $1.3 million, $1.4 million, and we need to collect on that right away. So yeah, that would be great. All right. So we've specified here, and we've got our bill. Now, we basically made our payment. We're basically done for this point. However, I need to validate that you all have made your payment because that was the whole purpose of this task. So we've got to actually show this. And you could say, well, I could just take a screen capture here, Dr. Barnes. So that's not good enough. That's not good enough. I want to see the document. So when you make a payment for your rent or when you make a payment for your transactions, usually you have some sort of payment documentation. For this particular one, we're going to have a paper check. We're going to have a printed check. So let's go ahead and find our check. So here's what I want you to do. You will need to navigate the path on this one because this is not a traditional step that we would walk through. So let's go to transactions. Go all the way down to management. And then we're going to go to print checks and forms. So transactions, management, print checks and forms. It should take you automatically to print checks and forms. So we're going to print a check. All right. So first thing we need to know, what account are we printing from? What account are we printing from? 1020. Yep, 1020, because that was the one we specified. That's going to be our purchasing account. So it says first check number 5. Is that consistent with what we know so far? Yep. Okay. So let's go ahead. Let's click on print. Next to this transaction here, we are not going to print this one right here. It appears that it comes up that there's a check number that's listed here for Bain Consulting as well. That appears to be their check number that they used as a customer. So it came up on our ID identification. We're concerned about this one right here, the one that we just created for 445.20. So let's go ahead and print. Make sure you do not click on print for both. You just want to print that first one. New window should open up. And it's going to look like this. Now, there's always some confusion here because everybody says, is this the check, Dr. Barnes? Think about if we were printing this out. We would probably have an official bank check that we'd be printing this document out onto. So this is just printing the type text onto a document, an existing document. So this is technically correct, okay, what we're looking at right here. It actually shows the reimbursement information or the payment information down here, and then the information that would go directly in the check. So this is actually a template, an existing template. So this is the check, although it's not the actual document of the check that we received from the bank. All right, so this is what you need to save. Now, does anybody remember what the caveat was to this saving this document and submitting to Brightspace? What did I say that you always had to do? You have to save it as a PDF. So let's go ahead and do that. Go to print, Microsoft Print to PDF, and save it as a PDF file. Again, please make sure that you submit this as a PDF file to Brightspace. Brightspace will not read the .nl files. At least not in my experience. Maybe it's changed. But once you create that check, save it, upload that to Brightspace, and we're done with another NetSuite assignment for the week. And the good news is we're also done with the purchasing process for the time being. Now, hopefully you took diligent notes on this. We do have an assignment coming up in week 12 that I'm going to give you the entire class period, and we're basically going to be working on it throughout, where we're going to replicate this process. You're going to be doing a series of purchases and a subsequent series of sales of those purchases. So we will be reiterating these steps again. Plus, this is going to be on the exam, so you will need to make sure you make notes of this. So again, if you're not taking diligent notes, I encourage you to continue to do so. Or you are taking diligent notes, continue to do so. If you're not, probably want to review the information that we went through. It'll be a little bit awkward if we get to class on class in a few weeks, like 3 weeks from now, and everybody's trying to pull up a video and trying to listen to it at the same time, and there's just a lot of noise going on in the background. So the notes are going to be very helpful for you. All right, and with that, we're moving on to homework. So anybody else look at this homework and said this was an easy homework? I really want to go back to this type of homework and just guess like this is a welcome change from UML diagrams, wasn't it? Very, very basic and straightforward. So big data is often described by the 4 V's, or in this class, the 5 V's, because remember, I specified that you didn't need to know all 5 of them. What are the 4 V's the book talks about? So volume, velocity, veracity, variety. Those are the 4 the book talks about. So that's B. What was the 5th one, by the way? Value, okay. So when we talk about volume, is that going to be large or small? Technically speaking, it's huge, okay? They say huge volume, okay? What about velocity? That high or low? So does data move quickly, or does it move slowly in this day and age? Compare this to like the 1850s when we had the Pony Express. How quickly does data get transmitted nowadays? Very quickly, very high velocity. What about veracity of data? Is that high or low? First of all, what does veracity mean? We talked about this on Monday. What does veracity mean? It's accuracy of information. Accuracy of information. It's the easy way to think about it. Yeah, but quality of information. Yeah. So what do we say? We said the data that's on the internet is not always accurate. It's not always trustworthy. So we'd say low veracity. And then what about variety? Yeah, so high or low on variety? High. And then volume, high or low volume? High value, or sorry, I said volume, I meant value. Good correction. High value, very good. Okay. Question number 2. According to estimates considered in the chapter, up to what percentage of data analyst time is spent cleaning or scrubbing the data to be ready for analysis? Well, this was bad news because we said there was a range. What was that range? 50 to 90%. So up to 90% of your time could be spent scrubbing or cleaning data, which is not real happy news if you're just like saying, I really want to ask the questions right now, Dr. Barnes said, well, you got 90% of your work ahead of you before you can do that. That's really unfortunate. Acronym ETL. So what does ETL stand for? Extract, transform, and load. Yes. So we need to make sure we pull the data we need, we transform it to usable format, and we put it into that so we can actually do the analysis. Okay. Yeah. So although I do like extrapolate, transpose, and load, that's kind of cool too. Which term describes used to describe the science of examining raw data, removing excess noise from the data set, and organizing the data with the purpose of drawing conclusions for decision making? What do we call that? The focus of this chapter, by the way. It's data analytics. It's B, data analytics. All right. ADS is a standard for data and files that typically need to support an external audit given finance and business process areas that developed by the AICPA. ADS stands for what 3 words? Now, there was a big clue in this question because it says it was developed for external audit, okay? So that first word is probably what? Audit or auditor. Is it going to be audit or auditor data standards? Audit data standards. Yes, very good. All right. Then we start having some questions about the different types of analytics. So let's go ahead and talk about the 4 types because this will definitely be on the exam. All right. So we have our contemporaneous analytics, the one that occur currently. All right. We have descriptive analytics, which basically asks what type of question. It says, what happened? Looking at data and saying, what does it tell us? What went on? Then we have a question about the diagnostic analytics. Diagnostic asks the question, Why did it happen? What was our analogy for diagnostic analytics anyway, by the way? Does anybody remember that? I brought up terrible memories from 221 of variance analysis. I was where you have to ask those questions. All right. Is anybody still haunted at night from variance analysis? I am too, and I taught the class for like 4 years. So yeah. Okay. So then we have our ones that are look in the future. Okay. We have our predictive analytics, which say what will happen, trying to make a determination. That's very, very consistent with what you've done in other classes, like your finance classes or in your statistics classes when you do like a linear regression. And then we have the most complex and complicated is a prescriptive analytic, which is saying we think we know what's going to happen. What do we need to do in response? And so varying degrees, they get more and more complex the more further we move up, but they get more valuable too. So the question then says, what type of question does prescriptive analytics address? So we start with the most complicated at first. So remember we said prescriptive analytics says, what should we do based on what we expect will happen? That's all there is to it. Now, I do want to clarify, on the exam, there's multiple ways that I could ask this question. This is one of those ways, but this is probably not sufficient because we're going to need to also understand what are some examples. The good news is starting on Friday, we're going to be looking at examples of different types of analytics and how they can be used. But be sure you understand not just what the definition is, but how the application of that definition works. What about predictive analytics? Well, prediction basically says, I'm trying to figure out what's going on. Has anybody ever tried to make a prediction about the future? Say, I predict that I'm going to graduate from Truman State and make $1 million per year. And if it's like, if that's true, if that becomes true, I hope that you'll support the university in your success in the future. Okay. I'm a little bit short of $1 million per year right now. I'm not quite making that, but that's I sincerely hope that for everybody in the room. Actually, I don't know that I hope that for everybody in the room because that would mean inflation has gotten really out of control. Okay. So I hope everybody is very comfortable. Let's put it that way. So predictive analytics, what's going to happen in the future? So D is going to be our identification for number 7. Will it happen in the future? Then what type of analytics address the question, why did it happen? So why is basically asking a contemporaneous question, a current question. So we say something happened. Why did it happen? It's not descriptive. That is diagnostic analytics. Okay. Type of analytics asks the question of whether a customer will ultimately pay if credit is granted. So this is an interesting one because this is not asking why or what will happen or why did it happen. It's asking, here's the situation. What type of analytics would best answer this question? So will a customer pay if credit is granted? So how do we actually paraphrase that question? Would that be best paraphrased by what will happen if we grant credit? That seems like a best way of paraphrasing that question. So if we say what will happen, what type of analytic is that? It's a predictive analytic. Good, predictive analytics. What if we want to know what score we need on the final to get in the class and based on expected performance of the final, we call that what? So this is actually very relevant to your decision making for classes, this class and other classes as well. So you know what your grades are all the way up until the final, and you're really angling for that A, all right? And you're just like, okay, here's my performance up to this date, or here's my performance up to this date, and you may not have all your grades in, so you may have to make some expectations about certain grades, but what will I need to do if I want to accomplish the A in the class? So that's looking forward. That's a future looking one. So it's either predictive or prescriptive. Which one is this going to be most appropriate to? This is a prescriptive analytics. It's saying, what should we do based on what we think will happen? I think that I'm going to have 400 points out of 500. And if I want to get an A, I need to get 50 points out of on the final exam in order to get an A. Okay. That would be the easy way to think about that. What do we need to do based on what we think will happen? All right, moving forward. Some problems here. So data analysis can be disaggregated into 4 steps as part of the AMPS. So remember, AMPS model is ask the question, master the data, perform the analysis, and share the story. Now, we're not going to be talking about all 4 of those steps. We're only talking about the middle 2. We're talking about mastering the data, which is basically our ETL step, okay? Extract, transform, or load, or performing the analysis. So each of these talks about one of those 2 scenarios. So we need to identify which scenario is being specified, okay? So let's go ahead and do this. Is it master the data or is it perform the analysis? Removing extraneous data and noise. Now, when we say noise, are we talking about literal noise, like literal sound? We're talking about detail within the data that is not relevant to the decisions or the analysis that we're trying to perform. So we have to remove that. So it might be like extra characters that are in certain fields that we don't want to have there. So what would that be? Would that be mastering the data or performing the analysis? It's mastering the data. Okay, that's part of our ETL analysis. Okay. Looking for trends in the data might predict new sales opportunities. Mastering the data or performing the analysis? This definitely looks like something we would do if we were doing the analysis itself. We were performing the analysis, okay? Finding the necessary data for financial reporting system to give to the internal auditor for analysis. Now, this is an interesting question because it's saying finding the necessary data from the system to give to the external auditor. Are we actually performing the analysis in this step? No, we're looking at the data itself. We're trying to say what would be appropriate for the question that the external auditor is asking. So we're looking through the system and trying to pull the data. We're trying to extract the data. Extract, transform, and load is also better known as ETL. Yes, that's what I was looking for. Mastering the data, guys. Come on. That's what I was looking for. Mastering the data. All right. Performing internal test or performing test of internal controls by the external auditor. So we actually got our data. So what are we doing now? We're analyzing it. We're analyzing the data. So performing the analysis for internal controls. Considering Champaign, Illinois weather patterns to predict corn production in the immediate area. It's a very specific city. They picked Champaign, Illinois, and I'm honestly legitimately curious now how much corn production goes into Champaign, Illinois. Anybody knowledgeable about that?
So I don't know how corn production there really is since it's a giant campus area.
There's a lot of farming going on here, and we're also kind of a town, but Champaign is just certainly a lot larger than Kirksville. So, but again, that's not necessarily a relevant question. It's just something I observed. Okay, so predicting weather patterns to predict corn production. So that word prediction implies some sort of analysis. Okay, predictive analysis, which means that we are performing the analysis. We're performing the analysis right there. Then finally, consolidating large volumes of data from multiple sources and platforms. Are we actually doing any analysis in this step? No, we're taking the analysis and putting it together. So this is mastering the data. All right. Next, match the definition of 4 V's of the big data best describes. Okay, so volume, velocity, variety, veracity listed on the right. And then we've got on the left some examples. So let's just go ahead and jump to these quickly. Unstructured and unprocessed data, such as comments in social media, emails, and global positioning systems and measurements. So which of the 4 V's that's listed, this is not all 4 V's, remember we're missing value, but value is not going to be one of the answers. Which of the 4 V's is going to be most appropriate for the different types of data that we can encounter? I'll give you a hint. It begins with the letter V. Sounds like variety to me. Sounds like variety to me is what we're working at. Variety, okay? The massive amount of streaming data involved. So if we're talking about a large amount, what's another word for large amount? Volume, yes, okay. Data coming in at fast speeds in real time, such as streaming videos and news feeds. So we're talking about speed. We're probably talking about velocity, good. Opinions or facts? Now that one's kind of interesting, okay? So facts, generally, we're going to assume are pretty consistent. What about opinions? Do people have different opinions? Yeah, I think if I say pineapple bologna pizza, I'd open up a can of worms in this room. We'd have a lot of differing opinions in that one, okay? All right, so some people are just kind of like, yes, some it's like, no, no way, none, ever. Some people like, it's okay, certain situations, okay? So we got a lot of different opinions. What do we talk about that when we say that there's going to be some a conflict between what is factually correct and what we believe to be correct? That's veracity, okay? Veracity. Now, if you wanted to argue a variety on that one, I could see an argument for that one because there's going to be a variety of opinions. But the fact that we constrain this according to facts probably leans more towards the idea of veracity. Data with a lot of missing observations. Okay, so some consistency issues in that. If we're talking about a lack of consistency, we're probably also talking about veracity in that situation. So that's going to be a problem if we're talking about that. That is going to happen, by the way, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in detail when we get to AI analysis later on in the course. Stock market data that updates every 5 seconds. 5 seconds is really fast. If we're talking about something that's fast, we're probably talking about velocity, good. All financial statement data that appears in tables. Okay, so this one's not really clear. I think that you could actually apply multiple V's, but if we're talking about the nature of tables, it doesn't really specify what the type of tables it is. So if we're talking about a 10K, we're probably talking about some consistency. But if we're talking about just general financial statement data, financial information, can we say that the financial information for one company is going to be different from all the other companies' competitors? Now, the reason that we do financial analysis in financial statements, traditional, is because we want to be able to make them comparable. But if we're talking about raw, untransformed data, comparability is probably out the window because everybody presents their information differently. What do we talk about it when everybody is a little bit different? That's variety. Now, could you make an argument for another one? Yes, this is not as clear. They didn't really give a good one there, but I think variety is probably the most appropriate. And then all Twitter data from 2021. That's volume. That's volume. And then all Twitter data from 2024, that's no volume because everybody meant to moved over to Blue Sky apparently. But I don't know. I'm not on social media except for Facebook, so like, even then, it's hard to keep track of. All right. It's really, really awkward when you try to make a joke and it's just crickets in the background. It's like you can literally hear the crickets, even there's no crickets. Yeah. So match the definition of this keyword, stay with the term. So we got 6 keywords over here and 6 terms over here. So let's see if we can figure out what's going on here. So a standard format for data files and fields typically need to support an external audit. Now, the external audit gives this one away, okay? Because the last word kind of keys on in this one. But if I were just to say a standard format for data files and fields, would that still be appropriate for this answer? It does not have to be specifically used for an external audit. It's just external audit was where we derived these standards, okay? Now, I do want you to keep that in mind because that might be relevant in the future, is that this was derived from purposes of external audit, but the standards could be applied in many different settings. What are these standards called? They are audit data standards. Okay. Data sets that are too large and complex for businesses' existing systems to handle using traditional capabilities to capture, store, manage, and analyze these data sets. So a lot of data, if you're talking about a lot of data, what are we talking about? That's big data. That's big data. Yeah. So 1 and 2 matched A and B, by the way, which is really, really weird. But did the computer fall over? Yeah. That's been happening a lot lately. Yeah. So don't sweat it too much. Unless, of course, your computer's on fire, then sweat it a lot. So okay. All right. The process of cleaning and scrubbing the data before data analytics can take place. That's ETL. ETL, but ETL is not on the list. What's another term for ETL? Master the data. Good. Process of determining how separation of duties was violated at the company. I don't like the term separation. It's segregation of duties, okay? But segregation of duties is, so basically we're trying to determine how segregation of duties was violated. What are we trying to do if that's the case? What are we trying to do? Well, this is an interesting question because it's an analysis, but are we asking what happened or are we asking why did it happen? I think this one we're probably asking more about why did something happen because we're trying to determine, we know that the segregation of duties is violated. We're trying to determine why did the segregation of duties violation occur. So, but they're asking the question why, what is it going to be? Diagnostic analysis. Good. All right. Process of summarizing accounts receivable by how long it's been outstanding. This is going to be very familiar because we're going to look at this here in a few weeks. Or I think actually upcoming here this next Friday. So we're trying to determine how long accounts receivable has been outstanding. That's just saying what happened. Okay. What happened, which means it's a descriptive analysis. Last question for the day. Delivering findings to the decision maker of which firms our company should approve for credit. So what are we going to be doing in chapter 11? We're going to be doing some analysis where we say we know what the results are. What is the best way we can share that information? That is going to be sharing the story. Yep. A few minutes early today, a little bit of a bonus for you. I will see you on Friday for Excel and AI.